specifies. Thanks.
Mr. Nissan, I believe you were also in the room as well. Did you want to comment on the recommendations? Is this something that, are those something that the Assyrian community would support?
Absolutely. We do support all of the motions that you put forward, or the recommendations you put forward. We also wanted to add to it, and I know green zone was mentioned in discussion at the last meeting. To us, the green zone is an Inuit Plains region. We have already started an Inuit Plains protection unit that is dedicated, that are starting to train, that are aimed at protecting that region from any onslaught from ISIS or any other opposition groups. The hope is that we have about 4,000 signed recruits. We have only 500 that are trained. The hope is that through the current mission that Canada is already involved with training and arming the Peshmerga, that some of those resources are allocated towards the NPU to help them establish themselves as a defining, or as a fine force within the NPU, within the Inuit Plains, pardon me, and to provide protection and aid to the Assyrians and the Yazidis.
To you as Mr. Nissan, Mr. Clayton, as well as Ms. Schmidt-Teagan, we've heard several witnesses, different witness groups, everything from groups that are working with LGBTI refugees to Yazidi refugees themselves, saying that the UN selection process for vulnerable minorities is flawed. And you know, I really don't think that this is a partisan issue by any stance. It's just becoming a fact that's coming out of testimony. Some of the areas of flaws that have been mentioned are very lengthy delays. One Yazidi man showed or had an appointment from one of the refugees in the camps for 2022. He talked about discrimination based on religion executed by the UN officers. These are difficult things for us to talk about. We kind of don't want to talk about these things. But I'm wondering if these are things that have actually been, if in your experience as on-the-ground organizations, you can validate. And if we should be, as a government, talking to the United Nations, which does excellent work, but if they're asking us to accelerate the asylum claims of Yazidi applications, we had somebody from the UN in the room here earlier this week. They weren't able to tell us that they've taken any measures to rectify some of these issues that, you know, if we're relying on their lists and they're not giving us those names, there's a problem. So I'm wondering if you can validate that testimony, or if you can expand on it, or, you know, if it's not factually correct, let us know. But I think that this is something important that we have to talk about and not turn a blind eye to as a result of this committee. So I don't know, Ms. Teagan-Schmidt, or Schmidt-Teagan, I know you're on the ground there. Would you like to begin?
Sure. I can say that much of what you've heard is true. Just today, I got two reports that I found disturbing. One was the report of some of our workers visiting a refugee who had an appointment for 2021 and was told maybe not even 2021, it might be 2022. So I can confirm that that is definitely true, and it makes no sense to me why the UNHCR cannot be providing refugees. That was just for refugee status. That wasn't even for immigration. That was just for status as a refugee to be able to move forward in the immigration process. The other report that I received today was from Greece, which was a Yazidi, one of our Yazidi beneficiaries commented to one of our workers that it was really hard for them because they were still living in Muslim context, and the Muslim NGO workers that were serving them were, after hours, overheard calling them all sorts of names. That
you there. So this is a difficult topic to discuss. And I think it got glossed over in the last committee meeting. So we had Yazidis say that they had experienced discrimination by Muslim UNHCR workers. I know this is something that's very difficult for us to talk about, and but are you validating that particular comment with this anecdote?
I am, yes.
Mr. Nissan, did you want to comment, just with the time I have remaining?
Yeah, I could speak to my own personal family. I had an uncle who was in Syria. When Khabur fell, he still remained there to help the internally displaced people to kind of evacuate the region, if you will, and try to find accommodation and shelter in Hasake. His daughter is now living in Sweden. His son is in Germany. and he's in Canada now finally after 2 years of paperwork. Him, his wife, and his youngest daughter are now in Hamilton. So that was also through private sponsorship. So they're living with his brother. So it is a long and lengthy process, absolutely. And they are at the point of desperation where they're willing to tear apart their entire family just for the safety and security of Western nations. So we're seeing lots of families in the similar state where you have some in Europe, some in Australia, some in Canada, U.S., but they don't care as long as they're alive. They'll figure out a way to reunify later. But right now, get out of there, and that's their only mindset.
Thank you. Do I have time left, or?
You have 30 seconds.
Mr. Clayton.
Il vous reste 30 secondes. Monsieur Clayton, je vais vous accorder le reste de mes 30 secondes. J'aimerais que vous nous disiez, en fonction de votre expérience, si on devrait recommander aux Nations unies de fournir davantage de formation à ses employés, ou est-ce qu'on devrait intervenir autrement pour protéger ces personnes et aussi pour tenir compte du fait qu'on a déclaré qu'il y avait effectivement un génocide? Eh bien, je crois qu'il faut d'abord se pencher sur qui s'adonne à ces pratiques. Oui, nous voulons croire que les principes humanitaires prévalent et que l'intégrité prime, mais en fait, il y a aussi la réalité. Il faut se demander si c'est une priorité dont il faut tenir compte. Est-ce que ces gens-là sont au courant de ce qui se passe? Je ne sais pas s'il y a des mécanismes en place pour ce faire. Merci. Madame Kwan, 7 minutes. Je remercie tous les témoins d'être venus se faire entendre aujourd'hui. Bon, j'aimerais revenir sur quelques propositions qui ont été faites. Il semble qu'on ait affaire à un thème récurrent. Bon nombre de témoins en ont parlé. On a proposé de rétablir la catégorie des personnes du pays source, et cela vise les personnes déplacées. Ainsi, grâce à ce type de programme, elles pourraient présenter une demande d'asile. J'aimerais savoir ce que les témoins en pensent. Nous allons commencer par les témoins présents dans la salle. Nous devons trouver une solution. C'est ça l'objectif. La catégorie du pays source, c'est intéressant. Et oui, on devrait rétablir cette catégorie. Parce que de jour en jour, on est en train de perdre espoir. Et plus on attend, plus il y a des vies qui sont perdues, plus il y a des familles qui sont déchirées. Le fait de proposer ce type de catégorie, ce serait bon à long terme. En ce moment, c'est le désespoir qui prévaut. Il faut trouver une façon de régler à court terme le problème et puis ensuite on s'occupera des éléments à long terme. On a été capable de faire venir 25 000 Syriens en quelques mois. Et par contre, on a pu réussir à faire des contrôles de sécurité, etc. Alors je ne vois pas pourquoi on ne pourrait pas en faire autant pour les Yazidis. Avant de passer aux autres témoins, et je crois que vous étiez présent dans la salle lorsque j'ai lu un certain nombre de propositions et de recommandations pour études, y compris le fait de prendre des mesures immédiates pour protéger les victimes de génocide et protéger les femmes qui ont été violées, les femmes qui se retrouvent veuves étant donné qu'on a tué leur mari. Et il y a aussi les orphelins. Je crois qu'il y a 3 000 à 5 000 victimes. Et on devrait prendre des mesures pour faire venir ces personnes au Canada rapidement. Mais il y a aussi beaucoup d'autres groupes qui ont été recensés. Et on nous dit que ce qui manque, c'est la catégorie du pays source. Cela veut dire que les personnes qui sont déplacées à l'intérieur de leur propre pays ne peuvent présenter une demande d'asile sans cette catégorie. Monsieur Clayton. Effectivement, je crois qu'on doit agir immédiatement. Et là, il y a la définition de réfugiés, la définition de personnes déplacées. Oui, les mots, c'est important, mais on ne doit pas s'attarder à cela. Il faut penser à d'autres mots comme génocide, par exemple. Donc, il faut agir. Madame Schmidt-Tiegen?
And anything that's been said.
Okay. I'll just repeat my question then. I was
Thank you.
asking about immediate action, and it's been suggested to the committee that we take immediate action, particularly to target the victims of the genocide, women who've been raped, women who are widowed, orphan children, and to take a special measure from government to immediately expedite in bringing the survivors of the genocide to here to Canada, with the range of 3,000 to 4,000 to begin with. And then, of course, ultimately, what's coming forward in a lot of the committee's testimony from different witnesses is that what we need is a classification, the source country classification to be reinstated, perhaps in a adjusted manner, but to be reinstated so that we can address the issue of those who are internally displaced, and so that there's an avenue to which they can seek refuge elsewhere. So I'd just like to get your comment with respect to action that needs to be taken, and what your thoughts are around the source country classification.
I definitely agree that immediate action does need to be taken. The source country thing is hard because we need some sort of system to be able to work with the IDPs who do not have refugee status. So how do we get them out to a place where they can get refugee status so that they can start the immigration process? And that's a huge bottleneck for these people, especially the vulnerable who do not have men in their households who will do this stuff. So many of the women who have escaped from ISIS or been released somehow, they have come back and they don't necessarily have a husband anymore. Their husband might still be in captivity, their children might still be in captivity, or they might just have their children with them. And so they have no one to actually go through that process with them. And for many of these families that are from the Sinjar area, many are uneducated, and so they don't necessarily even know how to start moving forward with that process. So there's a lot of advocacy that needs to happen in country to start helping them be able to gain refuge in another country.
So in light of that challenge, are there folks on the ground, organizations, and international human rights groups perhaps could come into can be utilized in order to provide assistance to help get those applications if there was a source country class stream?
I think there are definitely organizations. I think of Yazda, Free Yazidi, different organizations who could come alongside to help with that process. One of the big things that I know that a lot of organizations here face is just being understaffed and underfunded. And so if there's a way to help staff that kind of program, I think you would find organizations who would be willing to come alongside and help the Government of Canada in that process.
Is it possible for us to receive the committee, to receive that information? So if there are organizations that you think could be of assistance, and extend this to all the witnesses, to provide that information to the committee. And I see the chair is sitting up telling me that my time is up.
Thank you, Ms. Clark.
I can definitely do research on the ground here.
Mr. Sarai, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you to all of you, from Iraq to those that have been in Sudan and Eritrea. This question is to Mr. Marshall. We've heard, not just now, but also before, and I first want to point out that I have the highest regards for the United Nations and specifically their human rights and refugee wing, in acknowledging that the Yazidi atrocity is in fact a genocide, and they did it very diligently and appropriately and with the right research and analysis. But what I found troubling is to find out, and although you're not the expert in that area perhaps, but maybe you can comment, is why the process to even be interviewed and be called called a UNHCR refugee would take 2021 or 2022 for your first interview. I just find that appalling that somebody would have to wait in a UNHCR camp and just gotten refuge, but then have to wait for 4, 7, 6 years to be able to be considered that. Can you comment on that?
No, I don't work for UNHCR. I work for the Human Rights Office. I also don't cover Iraq, so I can't speak to the issue, I'm afraid.
Okay, well, thank you. Okay, I will ask you, maybe Ms. Schmidt-Teagan, if you can elaborate. Have you asked and inquired on why the delay in timelines has happened in these UNHCR camps? Why it takes so long? What's the logical answer that they've given back, or the explanation?
I have not asked yet. The example that I gave happened in, I believe, Turkey with one of the families that had fled there. Now that I know about it, and I only found out about it today. Now that I know about it, it is a question I want to start asking my UNHCR colleagues here on the ground.
And my second question is, do you know why, even if they are in segregated camps, we understood today that the Yazidis are in segregated camps. Why are they still facing violence and threats while they're in the camps, or are they safer while they're in their segregated camps?
In the segregated camps, there is a degree of safety, and the people that are in charge of the camps that I work with are Yazidis themselves. So there is a degree of safety that is guaranteed to them in the camps. So because of the rumors that they've heard in Greece and Turkey, there is a huge hesitation on their part, even though the deplorable conditions in the camp, even because of the deplorable conditions in the camp, there's a huge hesitation for them to even pursue leaving because of what they've heard back from other people.
Do you have any numbers of how many Yazidis would be still in an ISIL or Daesh-controlled area in Iraq?
It's over, I know in captivity there's over 3,000 still, and in most of the Yazidi population fled into northern Iraq, so there's very few left in Daesh-controlled Iraq.
So there would be a few that are, I guess, internally displaced. The rest would be, although might be still in Iraq, but in a separate or safer area relative to obviously being under ISIL. Am I correct?
Yeah.
My next question would be to Mr. Clayton. Sponsorship agreement holders, and I know you said you're not a sponsorship agreement holder, but since you deal with refugees, is one way, they are allowed to identify who they would like to sponsor, and not just the priority of the UNHCR, but they were able to make their own priorities to be resettled to Canada. What is your opinion on the balance of private versus government assisted refugees that Canada receives each year? Do you find that balance fair currently, or do you think it should be tilted in one way or the other?
Yeah, I find that question right outside my realm of expertise. I'm more aware of issues outside our country than ones inside. I know in terms of the family that we participated in their arrival in Canada, having sponsored or assisted someone in their arrival, I can just see the benefit of that in terms of the assimilation or the adjustment to life in Canada. So I think that's where I would, if I was a refugee, that's how I would like to be brought into this country.
Mr. Nissan, what's your thoughts on that, on privately sponsored versus government sponsored, and the ability that privately sponsored can pick and choose groups that they wish to sponsor?
Yeah, I'm going to echo the same as Mr. Clayton. I'm not well versed on that, whether or not the government is it doing enough or not enough or whatnot. I can't speak to that. I just know that through privately sponsored, through the despair, people are sacrificing everything that they can here to make sure that they do what they can, put up the money that they can to bring the people over, many of which don't have the means really and are really scratching and penny pinching everything that they can just to raise the funds to help bring these people over.
Mr. Marshall, if I have a bit of time, in order to be eligible for resettlement to Canada, a person must meet the UN Convention definition of a refugee or be outside of their country and seriously and personally affected by civil war, armed conflict, or massive violation of human rights. Do you think the definition for qualifying for Canada's protection should be changed, and if so, how?
Again, I'm afraid it's sort of outside my area of expertise. I mean, I was asked to come here specifically to speak about the human rights situation in South Sudan, so I didn't feel comfortable speaking to those issues, which is within the jurisdiction of another UN agency, which is UNHCR.
What I'm asking you, you're dealing with the IDPs in Sudan, and currently Canada doesn't have a proper mechanism to help those other than perhaps some humanitarian and compassionate ground applications. From your work or your knowledge, do you think it's better to revise those provisions for Canada, or do you think that the existing framework is satisfactory to assist those, or alternatively, do you think that aid is the main answer that is needed for those people that are in the areas that you've seen?
Again, I mean, it sounds like a UN bureaucratic response, but I just don't feel comfortable speaking to an issue that I don't have expertise in, if I may. I do have some suggestions that we'll go into in camera that may answer some of those questions.
Okay, fair enough. We'll keep those.
Thank you. Thank you. We will now suspend for a minute to allow the committee hearing to go in camera. I'd just like to inform some of the visitors to the committee that while in camera, it's just the committee members, the witnesses that are testifying, and the support staff that are allowed in the room. So I'll allow for a minute for the rest of the viewing public to leave the committee room.